Are they taking on a slew of new debt over at Warner Brothers? No. This is one of the reasons why they had to be so cautious about their renewal with the NBA broadcast contract, because it was going to triple in cost. And at the same time, the viewership ratings for the NBA had been dwindling steadily the last several years. So was it a good investment at that time to fight against Amazon and try to give them more money than what Amazon was producing? Probably not. They had to tuck their tail and go home.
Renegade Online.
Warner Brothers Discovery credit rating downgraded due to weak metrics. Now, unfortunately, I can't say this is a terrible surprise because, as I mentioned to other folks out there, we've said this for a while. If you take away the theme parks, Disney is Warner Brothers and Paramount. They would be in extremely similar situations. Okay, you take away the whole parks and experiences, because people like when the cruise ships and everything in parks and experiences. Take that out of the Walt Disney Company, and what you're left with is film and television studios. You have Warner Brothers and you have Paramount. That's it. So people like Paramount and Warner Brothers are far more susceptible to those secular headwinds we always talk about. Cutting the cord, linear collapsing, with streaming not being able to catch up as quickly in terms of revenue generation. S&P downgraded Warner Brothers Discovery now at BB+. So they're officially junk status. They also lowered the short-term and debt ratings for the media company. Now, I want to be careful here because, again, we don't give financial advice on this channel, but as a matter of analyzing the business side of the Hollywood and entertainment industry, it doesn't mean that they're in imminent default or collapse or something like this. The problem is for companies like Warner Brothers is as your credit rating gets reduced, your cost of borrowing increases, right? Investors are going to demand higher rates of return, i.e., higher interest rates to correctly price the risk. And if you have Moody's and AM Best and Fitch and Standard & Poor's, S&P, okay, if you have them reducing the credit rating of your bond issuance, that means that you're not going to be able to pay the cheapest interest rates possible to borrow money anymore. This is specifically in the issuance of corporate bonds. Some of those corporate bonds may be preferred stock or senior secured loans. Some of them may be subordinate loans that pay higher rates of interest because you're further on down the list if a company were to go bankrupt, right? But if you're a stockholder, of course, you're the one that's always getting paid last. So in this case, the problem is that the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, we talk about EBITDA on all these earnings calls all the time, right? They're now expected to remain around $9 billion for the next 3 years, according to S&P's global ratings in their adjusted EBITDA for Warner Brothers. Consequently, the leverage for the company is projected to be 4.3 times by the end of 2025. So what they're saying is the amount of debt that Warner Brothers has, they're projecting to be over 4 times higher than what their earnings before taxes, interest, depreciation, and amortization would be. They're very highly leveraged. Now, to be clear, that is exactly why AT&T spun this thing off when it did. That's why they brought David Zaslav in back in 2022. And this is what he's been fighting hard to try to correct. He knows we have a good product. We have a good library of content. We have a lot of good intellectual properties at Warner Brothers. We've got all the tools here, but it's going to take time to fix the financial boat. And it had a lot of holes in it. That's why AT&T wanted to get rid of it, like I said. Now, what has David Zaslav done the last several years? He's been working hard to cut costs and to pay down that debt, to basically get the leverage of the company down to a far more reasonable level. It's the 4.3 times by the end of this year is significantly higher than the 3.5x leverage threshold for the rating. So meaning because the leverage was higher than what the previous rating they had could bear, they had to lower it. Now, why is that? Are they taking on a slew of new debt over at Warner Brothers? No. This is one of the reasons why they had to be so cautious about their renewal with the NBA broadcast contract, because it was going to triple in cost. And at the same time, the viewership ratings for the NBA had been dwindling steadily the last several years. So was it a good investment at that time to fight against Amazon and try to give them more money than what Amazon was producing? Probably not. They had to tuck their tail and go home. And at the end of the day, it was probably the right decision. The other thing, though, is that the revenues have been holding steady, but the problem, or excuse me, the debt has been getting reduced, I should say, because that's what Zaslav has been working towards. The problem is what Zaslav is having trouble with, just like everybody else in the space, is that people are still cutting the cord, right? And we always talked about how the Walt Disney Company is the number one consumer of your bill on your cable bill. If you were paying $80 a month for cable, the biggest portion of that $80 was going to Disney for their network of channels that were on your basic cable system, especially and including ESPN, which is why ESPN streaming service is going to cost $30, exactly like we predicted. Warner Brothers was the next biggest component of the bill behind Disney, because of their massive network of channels in there, and because they have a lot of live sports on those channels like TBS as well. So the problem is more people cut the cord, even with the most basic cable package, whether you were watching Warner Brothers or not, whether you're watching ESPN or not, it has a big impact on Disney. It has a big impact on Warner Brothers. And there's not enough people that are filling up the gap by subscribing to HBO or Max. Not that they aren't subscribing. It's still the third biggest one out there, but they're not moving back in at a fast enough pace, or the profitability just isn't there yet to make it up. Everybody is facing advertising declines, cable revenue declines. It's happening to everyone out there that operates in the space. And again, that's why we refer to it as a secular headwind. It's a market force. It's a massive behavioral change in consumers. No more cable. They're going to go to streaming. They're going to be more selective. This is why the packages and everything else are much more important for everybody. So that's what's really impacted Warner Brothers the most, is the fact that they continue to lose revenue from those cable contracts, in other words, at a pace faster that they can pay down the debt to keep those ratios at a healthy level. That's a big problem. And this is why we always talk about David Zaslav honestly has one of the most difficult jobs in Hollywood right now. He doesn't have a buyer sitting in the wings right now ready to pick up and buy Warner Brothers like Paramount does with Skydance. Or I should say, yeah, with Larry Ellison's groups. I mean, you've got to, and there may come a time where that's going to happen with Warner Brothers. It might be in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. Right? And it depends on who that partner is. Could be an Apple, could be an Amazon, and there may be more ideas out there. But this is what's going on right now. Like I said, Warner Brothers isn't alone. And you can see here, they even tell you the downgrade reflects challenges in Warner Brothers' linear television network segment, which is anticipated to offset growth in its studio and streaming segments. So even though streaming is growing, even though studios are getting better, the linear side, it's killing them, right? Because it just keeps dropping. And there's not a whole lot they can do about it. They're looking at a decline of 20% due to, or Global Networks is forecast to decline 20% due to increasing revenue declines and increased content costs from newly acquired sports content, coupled with its last year of the NBA rights in 2025. Linear advertising is expected to decline 11% due to continued pressure on audience ratings and less sports than its peers. Right. But what do? Do you keep the 11% in advertising revenue and then at the same time commit to having to jump up to $2.5 billion a year in rights licensing that you're stuck with paying for the next 10 to 11 years? at a time when you don't know if that league is even going to still have half its audience 10 years from now because it's been on the decline. Again, it's one of those things that probably in the long run is better for Warner Brothers that they let it go. And they're even talking about, this potential separation of Warner Brothers, peeling streaming and studios out from linear. I just don't know how that's going to work, because then the global linear side of things is just, it's going to be an absolute pit. And this is basically why AT&T ripped Warner Brothers off to begin with and spun it out to merge in with Discovery. Zaslav still has a very big challenge ahead of him, and they need a big win this summer with stuff like Superman to try to make people feel better, I should say, about where Warner Brothers is going.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.